The planet's puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. And until we've thoroughly tested every last close-chested view, I find the more we think we know, the less we really do. Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Where would we be without THC? The Higher Side Chat Show, Greg Carlwood and Company.
Moving on up, Higher Side Chatters. From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood, and according to the most oldest writings and stories that humanity has, it was once widely known and commonly accepted that we have some other type of beings sharing space with this material matrix, and even maybe more than one. Call them gods, angels, demons, spirit guides, ascended masters, ultra-terrestrials, comic tricksters, multidimensional plasma beings, or simply the entities. But man has been trying hard to make sense of all these encounters, maybe as far back as man's been able to make sense of anything. And from the accounts of ancient cultures and countless biblical examples to occult workings and shamanic trance states, these spontaneous instances of bizarre interactions usually involve the themes of rulership, prophetic messages, information downloads, and oftentimes exchanges or gifts of some kind of out-of-place magical object. Many researchers even say crop circles are designs or blueprints for exotic energy systems we've yet to crack, or at least have yet to be released openly. But in 1947, something changed. Somehow we lost all prior context for these encounters, and the people were convinced by military intelligence and Hollywood social engineers that alien beings from a foreign planet crash landed in the New Mexico desert, and the story was intentionally leaked, and the reverse engineering of this so-called spaceship has remained the limited hangout alternative explanation ever since. Right on up to today, military whistleblowers are keen to send stories of this crash or that one, telling us full-blown disclosure is right around the corner, but according to today's returning guest, Chris Knowles, the whole disclosure movement is a distraction and a distortion to obscure the true triggers for encounters that conform more to the well-established historical context. Ritual and occult workings. THC listeners know Chris well as the man behind the Secret Sun blog and now the Secret Sun Institute of Advanced Synchromysticism and its Substack companion. He's also the author of many great books, including Our Gods Wear Spandex, The Secret History of Comic Book Heroes, The Synchromystic Handbook, and his novel, He Will Live Up in the Sky. In THC's 15 years, I believe this makes the 15th time we've had him here, and it's an honor to break in the new video format with the man who knows the plan, the Gen X high strangeness researcher, parapolitical pattern recognizer, and professor of the Secret Sun Institute of Advanced Synchromysticism. Chris, my man, welcome back.
Great to be here, as always.
Yes, so the audience knows we've talked about your Lucifer's technology series before, but it's one of my favorites, and it started almost a decade ago in 2016. Since then, a lot of things have happened that support the idea rather than take away from it. But if I was to boil it down to three major points just to catch everybody up, technology is a Trojan horse or a Faustian bargain with some sort of non-human entity, sometimes given through occult or ritual contact means. Events like Roswell and the giant leaps in technology need to be re-examined within that context, and the modern ETH UFO narrative was seeded as a cover story for something much more occulty that happened in the 1940s. Would you amend any of that as an explanation of the overall premise?
That's pretty strong. It's a pretty good summation.
I thought about this in advance, believe it or not.
No, it's pretty good. It's pretty good.
I like it. So let's fold in a couple of recent things that we didn't have to examine in 2016. Most recently, Katy Perry's space flight, if you want to call it that, from Blue Origin's New Shepard. You wrote about this in a titled post, Mystery Babylon, the Kate rides Lucifer's love rocket. Tell us about this. When you decode this the way you've decoded other things, what do you see in this space flight, as they say?
Well, it's not even near space. You know, they're just basically scraping the lower end of the thermosphere. So it's basically upper atmosphere. And they're not going anywhere near space. They never have. It's really just a big ego trip ritual for Jeff Bezos. The obvious phallic rockets that they use that everybody just like, what are they doing? What is that all about? It's all ritual. When I saw the most recent emanation of this with Katy Perry and all the rest of them, is I saw it as a ritual to Ishtar. And I don't think that's too big a stretch, because if you look at the mission patch, they have the 8-pointed star of Ishtar. And of course, the name New Shepherd itself corresponds with Tammuz, aka Dumuzi, the shepherd boy lover of Ishtar, aka Inanna, aka Atargatis, aka whatever you want to call her. So it just seemed clear to me by the mission patch, because everybody was sort of looking at it and going, oh, that kind of looks like Baphomet upside down, right?
Yeah,
and I was looking at it and going,
that.
well, actually, that looks like a uterus. It looks like a stylized uterus in the same way that Virgin's ridiculous space plane looks like a uterus. And the interesting thing about that is, like, why did they have that design on that patch? Because the rocket they sent up, the Dick rocket, doesn't look anything like what they put on the patch. So what's the connection there? So it was clear to me that it was all about this uterine sacrifice to the goddess Ishtar, who is the god of the sky, goddess of the sky. Don't forget. I mean, that's one of her roles, the sky and war. I think this whole quote unquote space race is no such thing. I think it's really just clandestine missile testing and also ritual practice, going back all the way to Parsons, who used to recite the hymn to Pan before every rocket launch.
Yeah, and there's definitely some interesting details about that whole thing in the corpus of the Lucifer's technology material. You noted that this Katy Perry thing also happened the day after Palm Sunday, which seems like a relevant detail. They are always playing with these patches and revealing little things in there. But what I thought was really kind of eye-opening was when you got into the logos for Blue Origin. So the current logo is a feather. Which, why? Maybe if you're talking about fallen angels, a feather makes some sense. And then the old logo, this is where it gets weird. Twin turtles appealing to the heavens, and the turtle is in the Babylonian Kunduru. It's apparently sacred to Enki. Enki was called the Lord of the World, and there's a winged hourglass on it. It's a very layered and complex symbol compared to the blue feather. But the Lord of the World is a name for Enki. He had 6 helpers. There's 6 ladies on this mission in the capsule. I think you're definitely onto something. Like I said in the intro, if the context is occult rather than ETH, it all has to be folded in. Roswell has to be folded in. All these events have to be folded in. So, yeah, when you look at the details of this thing, it is stranger than it appears, for sure.
Well, that Blue Origin patch, what does it have to do with spaceflight at all? The whole iconography of it just has no connection to shooting for the stars or so on. Listen, I'm old, all right? I'm an old Gen Xer. I used to be a big space guy. I used to be really into it. And then I just realized that it was all ritual, basically. Ritual and missile testing and propaganda for the whole idea of everlasting technological progress, which we're now realizing is a myth. We're really coming up against the end of it. No matter what they say with AI and all the rest of it, so little has actually changed because we don't have the control over atoms that we have over electrons. And I think all these quote unquote space programs, you make absolute almost trillionaires out of people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. And what's the payback? Well, they've got to perform the rituals, NASA isn't very good at it anymore. So you need some young, technologically savvy upstarts to perform the obligations to the sky gods. And to most people, that sounds absolutely insane until you really start to break down the symbolism and the timing. You talked about the day after Palm Sunday. Musk has been doing stuff on the cross-quarter days. I've been blogging on that. Beltane was a big one. So it's this whole process that really has nothing to do with space, because none of these things are going anywhere near space. I mean,
Yes.
they're not even getting up to where the, we're supposed to believe the ISIS is. And there's another name too, right? The International Space Station, ISIS, that they send the Dragon up to. So it's just totally Revelation 12. The whole thing.
Always layered.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing, it's all a big show. And coming to that realization was very difficult for me, because like I said, from being a little kid, I was really into space. I was into NASA. My mother used to order me like pictures of like the Apollo landings and stuff, and got me an autograph of one of the quote unquote Apollo astronauts. So I mean, it was a real come down. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee just how fake it all is.
Mm-hmm. And let me throw in these two other little things. I've mentioned them on the show before, but these are two other recent disclosures that conform with your hypothesis that we didn't have in 2016. But I recently interviewed Ryan Bledsoe, the son of Chris Bledsoe, the experiencer who kind of got brought in to be studied by the secret space program and the Invisible College folks. And then he kind of went rogue. He's like, I don't like your narrative. I'm going to go with what my experiences say. But when he was there talking to these guys, this is what came out of an interview where Ryan interviewed his dad. But he said, there he was consulting with them about what they're now calling plasmoids, which are angelic beings. They come out of the orbs. When asked how the orbs would appear to astronauts, Bledsoe said they would appear outside the space shuttle, look in the windows at them, and sometimes they stand over the shuttle bay or the space station glowing. Sometimes there's a report of a half a dozen of them, or a 125-foot tall one with wings standing there and smiling at them. All astronauts who go up past a certain point see these things. That's the report from that. Basically, Chris is reporting what was shared with him when he was kind of palling around with these guys. And then I sent you this in the DMs, but Diana Pasulka had this to say about her contact in the space program. Tim Taylor, who was Tyler in her book, anonymously, of course, the internet sleuths figured it out. Well, she says, our space program today even has some really interesting rituals associated with it when it does certain launches at Cape Canaveral. Maybe not all of them, but the ones that Tyler was involved with, they had images of Roman gods and goddesses put on the rockets. They would use Latin on their mission patches. They would also have specific rituals where they would do something involving U.S. presidents. They would position the president at a certain point where astronomical events would happen. They would be like, hey, Mr. Obama, stand here. And he would stand there with his wife and look in a certain direction. It was part of the whole thing. And there were photos. Tim has photos of all of this. I know a ritual when I see them, and he didn't even understand it. So I noticed that they were using Latin, and then I noticed it wasn't medieval Latin. It was a particular form of Latin. It seems like it was Roman theology. So I would ask him, why are you using the images of Roman gods? Why are you putting them on your mission patches and also utilizing Latin phrases from that time period? I mean, you're sending this up to space. Who up in space is going to read Latin? And his answer was, our sponsors. So crazy, heavy stuff, but both these things speak to the occult context rather than the ETH hypothesis. And so if we were going to talk about Lucifer's technologies being an even wider scoped thing, because Roswell, 1947, but the occult context for interactions with some beings goes back to the biblical times, before even. So what would you say might be the first example of technology as a Trojan horse? Some might say agriculture. I'm reading more stuff from people who say generally we're thought to be told that agriculture is this great advancement and it finally got us away from being hunter-gatherers. But now some anthropologists are looking back and saying they had to drag people into agriculture. A lot of people didn't want to be put up in this walled city and made to work the fields. It wasn't a better life than the previous one. What do you think in terms of early examples that would work with the Lucifer's technology premise outside of computer technology?
I think writing is really the original Trojan horse, because that allowed people to recreate reality in their own image. It gave the priests an opportunity to dictate reality, to dictate the universe, to dictate the nature of the universe to people who previously had just experienced it.
I think that could make sense for sure. Obviously, writing, sigils, it's all kind of there. People talk about circuit boards now looking like sigils. You'll see all these memes where they place them side by side. Yeah, you probably could take it back to writing. You got the Jordan Maxwell guys who talk about spelling and all that wordplay that goes into things. Yeah, I think you could make a good case that it is that. You go back to John Dee's Enochian, it was a language. He was told a language. Well, maybe Latin was an older language. Maybe there were original languages that were kind of delivered in the same sort of way.
Well, Alan Moore famously said that, spelling was spellcraft and grammar was grimoire. So that he believed, and this sort of brought him into this whole chaos magic world, that writing was a form of magic, that fiction was a form of magic, that you were basically recreating a world with just these marks on paper that we assume make these sounds or correspond to these sounds, and then these sounds ergo correspond to ideas and concepts and events and names and all the rest of it. But it's all invented. It's all imaginary. Okay. So our entire experience of the world is almost determined by this magic. Okay. Very ancient magic that we still use, that we haven't really improved upon, I would add. I would also say we haven't even improved on the codex book, the spine-bound book. We have ebooks and all the rest of it, but for an experience, you can't improve on the codex. So I think that writing and spelling and grammar are by nature a Trojan horse, because anybody can say something, put it in writing, and that people are going to respond to that with a higher level of credibility than they would spoken language. All right. We still have, even to this day, we still have a respect, maybe unearned respect, for written language. But what it has done is that it has allowed everyone to impose their own narratives on us. And I think one of the problems that we're having as a society today, and this corresponds to Lucifer's technologies, is that there are just so many narratives that we're being pummeled with, and it's just becoming impossible to sort them out. And I think what's happening now with a lot of people, that they're just kind of burning out. They're just almost kind of like tuning it out, because it just gets to be overwhelming. The human brain was not designed for this absolute avalanche, constantly 24/7 of information. So long way of answering a short question, but I would definitely say that it's writing. That's the original Trojan horse. But it also, language, computer language, coded language, all these kind of things, they all tie together. We wouldn't have computers without language, obviously. It's almost like a truism. But we wouldn't really have anything without language, because how do we convey information to each other? It's got to be written down, unless, you can speak to people directly.
Yeah, I agree. And it is interesting that you can do all that Jordan Maxwell type of stuff with language, like good morning. Morning with a U is, obviously what you do when someone dies. So there is this like kind of encoded darkness to some language, especially stuff that we use on a daily basis. And maybe there's a point to that. But you could scale it up to the computer technology stuff and look at every computer company, every Silicon Valley company. They all have these esoterically drenched names. The same way we talk about the rocketry program and the Apollo mission and Osiris Rex and SpaceX, Dragon X and Falcon X and all this stuff. Yeah, it's there also in the tech companies. Apple with the bitten apple has the religious context. Oracle, the Masonic apron is the Gmail logo. The Chrome logo has a 666. It's just like, well, I'm not even a religious person, but you look at example after example, and eventually you have to say they're communicating something here.
Well, I just wanted to add that the first Apple computer cost $666. Like that's, esotericism has always been deeply embedded into the military industrial complex, of which the computer industry is the central part these days. You can't separate it. You're talking about ufology and everything and how it was sort of seeded as a propaganda tool. But it isn't just that. That's part of it. But you also have to understand that there are a lot of people, particularly in the military, that are true believers. I mean, we see this all the time now. We see all these quote unquote whistleblowers appearing before Congress. They all have military intelligence, whatever backgrounds. I think there is and always has been, for lack of a much better term, a UFO cult within the government that I think even goes back before the age of UFOs as we understand them. Okay. I mean, you can go back to a lot of sort of proto science fiction in the 19th century and see traces of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is one of the things that I get confused about when I read your stuff, because you write about all these rituals and this exchange, like there seems to be a real thing happening, but then you'll call them like delusional psychopaths with OCD obsessed with LARPing. It's like, well, it's not LARPing and they're not delusional, are they? Because it seems like they do get results.
Well, there are a lot of people doing a lot of things. You can't make blanket statements like that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there are particular people that are delusional and are LARPing, and there are particular people who I would say a much, much smaller proportion of those people are actually in contact with something. I would say that the medium is what the medium has always been, which is hallucinogenic drugs. I think that is basically the foundation of all of this.
Well, something with nukes and rockets has to have like level jumped the interaction, or they wouldn't keep doing it that way. It's much easier for Steve Jobs to take LSD and get the idea for the iMac than it is for Jeff Bezos to send up a space stick with Katy Perry on it for whatever the hell reason, whatever that yielded. I don't know. Maybe it got some message. Maybe they all came back and said, yeah, the big thing in the sky told us that you need to take the company this direction. I don't know, but clearly there's a reason why they put so much extra energy and attention into this level of things as opposed to taking some drugs and drawing a pentagram.
Well, again, I mean, there are a lot of people doing a lot of different things. And the other thing that you have to take into account is since we sort of came up in this Abrahamic context that informed Western civilization for so long. And, there's a right way, there's an orthodoxy, and there's a wrong way. And they're the way things are supposed to be, and then there isn't. If you study paganism, a term that I actually don't like because it's not descriptive, but if you study pre-Christian religion or polytheistic religion, whatever you want to call it, there's just incredible syncretism across the board. Different people will have different definitions of different gods. They'll combine them willy-nilly. I mean, that's something that I've tracked quite a bit throughout this story, particularly with this syncretic god Jupiter Ammon, which seems to be very important into all this story because he was the god of Alexander the Great, who is the model for all modern conquerors and would-be world governors, right? It's very complicated. And I know that kind of sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but once you really start getting into the weeds with all this stuff, you can't make definitive statements about who believes what across the board, because as I said, there are a lot of different groups and a lot of different individuals and a lot of different cults that have different beliefs, that have different ways of seeing the world, and they believe that they might be all interacting with the same figures, but they experience it differently, right? Because if you go into, say, like a ayahuasca kind of experience, and you bring your cultural baggage with you, you bring your expectations, you bring your assignations, you're going into this world that is just completely outside of our reality, and you need to translate what you're seeing. And that's where I believe that comes in. And that's why we see so many people having different experiences throughout the age and even today,
Mm-hmm. So, all right, if Roswell and the spaceship crash thing was a cover story, let's get deeper into what was covered up. You write, throughout the entire series, I've been unable to shake a very strange thought out of my head. What if Roswell was expected or in fact orchestrated? And then later you say the Roswell events themselves are so laden with symbolism that one seriously has to wonder if what we saw was in fact some kind of ritual or not any kind of accident at all. And we talked about this 9 years ago, but decode this event a little bit for us for the uninitiated, because there's a lot of wordplay and stuff going on here that does speak to the ancient mythology type of stuff that you wouldn't expect in a random crash of some craft.
Well, there are a lot of things going on. There's sort of the name game or the nomenclature, and there's also alignments that are very important in the story that were kind of the code breaker for me. But there's also the timelines. So there are all these different things that, to me, all correspond to sympathetic magic, okay? Roswell is not far from the White Sands installation where they had the Trinity tests, the Trinity. But I don't think it's the Trinity that people are thinking of. I think it's this Trinity of Jupiter, Ammon, and Venus and Dionysus. It's sort of this Greco-Egyptian, Chaldean, Canaanite syncretism, all right, that was actually well documented in the ancient world. The crash itself, or what they call the crash itself, the alignments on it are very, very curious. There's a number of different things going on here. But if you just go due east, you're going to end up at Baalbek. And Baalbek, of course, temple to a syncretized solar Jupiter, as is Jupiter Ammon, who is the horned and hidden god, the rams. He was the figure of Zeus, but he had the ram's horns that come from a moon, and that corresponds to a lot of things that Crowley was interested in. But Roswell itself, the downtown area, if you keep going east there, give me just a second here. I've got so many notes.
I've got some notes here myself. So the crash is said to have taken place on the plains of St. Augustine, named after the church father Augustine of Hippo, who wrote extensively on the nature of demons of the air. So the event takes place at a spot named for a guy who was known for talking specifically about demons of the air. The Roswell Army Air Base was the home of the only atomic bomb wing group in the world at the time. So you kind of think that maybe that's where the exchange happened or the event happened, and maybe something dropped down as a result of a ritual in the area. But the Roswell Rosewell of Cadmus was always so interesting to me. You got this being Cadmus. Again, a lot of these beings have multiple names, but in Cadmus's mythology, he's associated with this red well of Mars. Mars is the red planet. Roswell, Rosewell. It's kind of all right there. And then you go on to say Cadmus, the civilizer, the shining one, the great initiator, would become, you guessed it, a reptilian. And then this is from the writings. Cadmus was deeply troubled by the ill fortune which clung to him as a result of having killed the sacred dragon. And one day he remarked that if the gods were so enamored with the life of a serpent, he might as well wish that life for himself. Immediately he began to grow scales and change in form.
Well, there's another very,
it's all there.
Yeah, there's another very, very, very important detail about Cadmus, though, is that Cadmus was instructed by the great gods of Samothrace, who were basically these chimeric figures who are said to be the sons of Vulcan, but who crashed to Earth in a meteor. They came to Earth in a flaming meteor, and then they crashed on the island of Samothrace, and they emerged from the island, and their little spaceship, let's say, and they start teaching everyone how to make stuff, make ships and all the rest of it. And they're the ones who instruct Cadmus. And Cadmus is a very important figure because he's seen as the founder of the Greek city of Thebes. He was the king of that city. And Thebes, of course, lent its name to an Egyptian city. And this is where you start to get all this very complex syncretism between Greek and Egyptian religion that we can trace back, of course, to Alexander, right? And the Ptolemies. And that is going to give us Jupiter Ammon, and later is going to give us Serapis, who some people feel was an influence on depictions of Christ and so on and so forth. So there's go ahead.
And let me just throw this out too. So if we're going with the premise that this ritual happened and it caused some kind of magical object to come down and scientists were able to take it and then make the transistor and make the circuit board and all these things, they had to have a story how these things emerged. And they gave it all to Bell Labs. Bell Labs is the company that just developed this stuff in a vacuum. Well, Bell Labs becomes Lucent Technologies,
Lucent,
and
yeah.
Cadmus and Lucent are the same word. The same figure is described with both names. So they didn't really hide it that much, but they basically gave the being the name of the company, and then this is what things emerged out of. Then it became AT&T eventually, because Bell Labs was so big, it was one of the few times they actually used the anti-monopoly stuff and broke up a company.
No, you actually got it backwards.
Okay, set me straight.
Bell Labs was a division of the old phone company, the old Bell company, which later became AT&T. And then Bell Labs sort of spun out into its own thing. It was separated as Lucent back in the 90s. My wife actually worked for that company for about 10 years. Where that all happened, where the transistor and all the rest of it happened, is about 20 minutes from here. But the symbolism, again, if you look at the old logo of Lucent, it looks like an Ouroboros, a snake eating its tail. And that corresponds to Cadmus, who became a snake, who became a serpent. But just get back to the alignments, because the alignments are really important as part of the story. So you did mention St. Augustine in the City of God, talking about the demons of the air, which was actually, he was quoting another author, a Roman pagan author, is how these beings behave and everything. And if you read that passage, it's almost kind of frightening, how it just sort of jives with a lot of things that people say about aliens today, right? So the Roswell crash site, as you said, plains of St. Augustine, on the almost just off by, 4 seconds of latitude, but it's basically the same exact latitude as Baalbek. And what's Baalbek? Baalbek is something you see all the time in Ancient Aliens. Like, how did they build a temple of Jupiter with these huge stones that nothing can move today? How was the Romans, if we believe that the Romans actually moved these stones, how were they able to move these things, which thousands of tons? I mean, we have no equipment today that can move those stones. They would have to be broken up, and somehow those are moved. So that's also part of it, because probably around that time when this whole alien technology idea and religion starts to kick in, people are looking at Baalbek and saying, well, that must have been aliens, or maybe even the giants, right? But also the 34th parallel is also the Socorro UFO event that some of you might know about, with the egg, and the egg corresponds to a lot of things that Kenneth Grant wrote about, who was one of Crowley's main acolytes. He was sort of allegedly given control of the OTO by Crowley himself, and then there was a split and all the rest of it. That's not really important. But the other thing too that's incredibly important, and I got this from the late great David Flynn, is that he talked a lot about the Watchers and Mount Hermon. So the Watchers, the reason why I think the Watcher cult, and these things are all sort of mixed in together, but the whole cult of the fallen angels, why is this important? Because what did they do? They brought technology down, didn't they? They taught, if you read the book of Enoch, they taught, how to use weapons, how to read the stars. They even taught the meteorology. I mean, all these skills. And of course, all of this was geared towards war. People will read like the Book of Enoch and go, wow, these watchers seem like they were really helpful. Well, no, they were teaching in the story, in the context of the story, they were teaching people all this technology so they could be more effective at waging war. That's basically the story. That's the rest of the story you don't hear a lot about. But so Mount Hermon is exactly parallel with downtown Roswell. So there's a couple of coincidences there that are really kind of hard to swallow. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how did how did this all happen? And then you have the Cadmus thing, but it's like almost every detail of names, dates, alignments, whatever you want to call it, corresponds to something important, something major in this whole ancient religion of these beings that would come to Earth and teach men things. So really you can see the fallen angels and the great gods of Samothrace as being basically the same figures, but just filtered through the cultural lens of the time. You know, you have the cultural lens of Judaism, apocalyptic Judaism in the late Neo-Babylonian Empire that really is the background for the Watchers and Enoch and the rest of it. And then you have whatever mystery cults are behind the whole things with Samothrace and the great gods. But they're really the same story. And you see these stories in all these different contexts. You know, I talk a lot about the Mithras cult. Why is the Mithras cult so important? Why do you see Mithras everywhere that you're not supposed to see it? Right? Well, Mithras was granted technology by the gods. He was given all these tools to fight the Gorgons and all the rest of it, to do the dirty work of the gods, basically. He was given technology. So all these belief systems that really come to prominence in the 19th century and feed into this whole military industrial complex matrix that gives us Roswell, that gives us ufology, that gives us all the rest of it, Hollywood, you name it, 100 years or so later, really springs from this weird matrix of secret societies during the Industrial Revolution, particularly in London specifically. But it's all feeding in through the culture. And I would say it almost reaches its apotheosis with ufology.
Mm-hmm. And with the alignments, obviously there are many. You also have this one where you point out that Area 51 is at 37 degrees, not far off from 34, but following that line east will take you into the heart of Sicily, ultimate birthplace of the ancient Eleusinian mysteries. Why is that? Because Sicily is where Persephone was abducted by Pluto, the king of the underworld. Sicily was the primary cult center for Persephone in the ancient world. Note also that Pluto was identified as a craftsman and possessed a helmet that resembled the kind of cloaking technology they were working on at Area 51, apparently. So even the tech itself, the descriptions in the ancient writings match the conspiracy lore of what's apparently at this location on the same parallel. It is quite layered and weird. And people are probably sick of me bringing up Patrice Chaplin, but I did just interview her. She's known for the book The Portal, which talks about this portal on top of Mount Cantigou in Spain and the people of Girona, this Kabbalistic lineage of occultists who have kept their tradition in that area a secret for a long time. But her follow-up book is The Stone Cradle. And if you're a person who's initiated into a cult or whatever, and they're willing to reveal some things, you put out the Portal book, great. But the thing that was even more secret to them was the Stone Cradle. And they brought out, I read the book, she describes them bringing out these scrolls and these old documents, trying to explain to her why they believe what they believe. They are a Luciferian cult. They believe that when Venus completed its cycle, it creates a pentagram every 7 or 8 years, the flower of Venus. When it completed that cycle 5,000 years ago, a meteor came from that point in the sky, hit the ground, and a being of light came out of it. And that was Lucifer. And according to the book, they still have the stone cradle. It is about the shape of this desk, probably, and you can lay on it and you'll be healed. And some kind of weird substance oozes out of the pores of this stone. And the cult bought the land and I don't know if they moved it or bought the land and it's never moved, but it is now on private property that they control. And so they take the Lucifer thing very seriously. They're not Satanists. They think of themselves as followers of a being that was very helpful. And maybe the church twisted it around because, they want to have the authority on everything. It's hard to unpack it all. It's like a flow chart of if you believe this, then this is the way it goes. And this is the moral orientation of this and that. But here's another story, totally separate from anything I've heard from you, where a group of people, a cult, say that their whole origin of why they believe what they believe and the knowledge they've gained is because a meteor hit the ground and it had healing properties. It was a technology and it came from a being that they call Lucifer. It's weird.
I don't know what the provenance of that myth is, per se. But it definitely jibes with a lot of similar myths. Talking about Mon Hermon and the fallen angels again. But you had mentioned Sicily. There are a couple of very interesting things because there's another mountain there. There's Mount Etna where Persephone and her handmaidens were picking daffodils, narcissus flowers. And then Pluto, Hades, whomever comes up through a portal, doesn't he? He comes up through the underworld through a portal. So there you go again. I mean, there's a belief that there's a portal at Mount Etna. But another interesting detail that I should just add in here is that the handmaidens of Persephone were turned into the sirens by Demeter. So they could, because the original sirens were bird women. They weren't mermaids. That was much later, right? The original sirens were like these bird women chimeras, and they were turned into the sirens so they could search the world for Persephone, even though she's not on the world, she's in the underworld. But there's also in a Jewish text, there's also a myth that the women who became the wives of the Watchers were also turned into sirens. Right. So there's this really interesting kind of syncretism, this almost like this subterranean tradition that runs through all these myths. But again, you're dealing with portals, you're dealing with technology, you're dealing with these beings that come through these portals associated with mountains. This ties in to what we talked about with Travis Scott in Astroworld. Remember that discussion we had with the portals and the rings of hell, and then all this symbolism that he was using. He had that big mountain stage set for all of that. Mm-hmm. So I think that there is part of this language, and again, everybody puts their own little spin on it. There's no orthodoxy. There's no pope of occultism, right? There's no pope saying, no, that's not how it really is. It wasn't at, this place in Spain. It was actually Mon Hermon in the Lebanon, or is, Mount Etna or wherever. There's no standardization of all this mythology. So when we see things like Roswell, you really have to pay attention to the details and track where all these details come from, because I think that's almost like part of the op, right? Is to sneak in all these little details that all correspond to sympathetic magic, by the way. I mean, why do all these things happen? This is something that I always wondered for years, because I'd always see like, there's this music video and they're putting all the stuff in, or, the one eye and all the rest. Like I never was very convinced by the explanations that a lot of people putting this material forward had, until I started studying the history of sympathetic magic and ritual magic. And I realized, this is all ritual magic. This is all they're using, these symbols and these alignments and these dates and all the rest of it to basically practice sympathetic magic, so they can bring that power of these figures that they're trying to draw on or call upon unto themselves.
Yes. And let me bring this up too, because in previous conversations about this, we have not gotten to the Collins Elite. People who listen to this show, they know about the Collins Elite. It's this society, I guess, within the Department of Defense that thinks that the aliens are demons. Well, this is from your blog. You quote Nick Redfern's book, and he says, beyond any shadow of a doubt at all, the strangest belief of the Collins Elite was related to the Roswell affair. In what is certainly a unique fashion, they came to believe that nothing extraterrestrial or otherwise crashed at Roswell. Rather, the group concluded that the event was staged, a Trojan horse type event provoked by demons trying to deceive us into accepting the idea that vulnerable ETs had crashed at Roswell and were responsible for the wave of flying saucer encounters that gripped the nation in the summer of 1947. For the Collins Elite, the alien debris and memory metals said to have been recovered at the crash site on the Foster Ranch were nothing less than the result of diabolical demon alchemy. In other words, the group formed an opinion that these strange entities weaved the materials, then had them manifest on the Foster Ranch, thus creating the image of a crash of something exotic from the skies. But what are the bodies said to have been found at the site? Well, the Collins elite had an answer to that issue too. Their members claimed to have read reports suggesting that no literal bodies were ever found at Roswell at all. Rather, they maintained that certain biological materials were recovered. So not bodies. Biological materials is interpreted as bodies in the ufology community.
Homunculi.
Exactly. I'm getting there. So, yes, you made comparisons to the golems of Jewish folklore, and then you actually said you think it's more of the homunculi, and you quote the chemical marriage of Christian Rosenkreutz, because that text heavily talks about the making of a homunculus. And it's, of course, one of the foundational texts for the Rosicrucians. And then you say, or should I say, Roswell-crucians. And that's interesting because that's another one of these things. So you wrote this in 2016. Again, I keep saying it, but Diana Pasulka, in her last book, she talks about her interactions with Jacques Vallée. And she's like, Jacques Vallée has this incredible library. And we were talking, and he pulls a book off the shelf, and he's like, I advise you to study this, look into this. And it's the book of Rosicrucianism. Why would he do that?
He's a Rosicrucian.
Know,
he is
well, right.
He is. I mean,
how'd you know a decade in advance that ufology is basically Rosicrucianism light?
Because I sat in a room with about 20 people, including Jacques Vallée, and he said, "I am a Rosicrucian." So,
what?
And yeah, back in Esalen, 2008.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I heard it from the horse's mouth. Okay, you know, I'm not making it up. The Collins elite are very interesting. So the Collins elite was that was like my first viral post, I would say, on the Secret Sun. That thing went viral big time. There was a real interest in that. To me, it was just another post. I didn't really even think, I think I put it up on a Friday or something. I mean, there really wasn't expectations for it on my part. I don't want to say I'm skeptical of the Collins elite, but I almost wonder if it's kind of like Ong's hat or something. It's like a thought experiment. I've never seen compelling evidence that this group even exists. Okay. I obviously read Final Events, and I've read a lot of the follow-up materials on it. It seems to me that it's similar to the Rosicrucians. I mean, the Rosicrucians basically are believed to be a hoax, right? The original, the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz was seen as, you know, there were all sorts of theories about it. If you've ever read the book Cult's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, they talk about how the book was being used for all these Templar remnants to communicate with each other. You know, they had no, you know, this was before telephones and all the rest of it, and they needed to sort of communicate. So they encoded all this information into that text that they use. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but the point is that it's very interesting that you bring those two phenomena up together, because I sort of see the Collins elite as like the Rosicrucians. I mean, the Rosicrucians sort of evolved. It starts off, I think most scholars agree that, I don't want to say a hoax per se, but it was a concoction. All right. It was an invention. All right. And I think that it took on a life of its own, and it started to incorporate things from Hermeticism and alchemy and Freemasonry and other Kabbalah, all these different esoteric traditions, and became its own thing, and became, you know, extremely successful. You know, when the Theosophical Society really started to decline around the 1920s after the whole Krishnamurti thing, the Rosicrucians, the Amorc, right, really they were very popular. They built all these incredible temples. I think there's one out in California. There's one in Pennsylvania. They were very successful because it's an idea, you know, it's the power of an idea. And I think the Collins elite is kind of the same thing. It's like this idea that these are these men within the Pentagon, these people within the defense establishment that are concerned about UFOs, but not from the standpoint that we would assume, that they see them as this expression of demonic activity. ironically, I would say they're probably closest to the truth, right? I mean,
Right,
whoever put forward this, I would very heavily recommend, if you haven't read it already, but to read the text on ultra-terrestrials by Dr. Carl Raschke, who sort of put the final pieces for the whole Lucifer technology series into context for me. And his whole way of thinking is that the ultra-terrestrials are these beings that can exist in our world and are seeding people like computer scientists or whomever, so we can enter their world. Okay. That's really what, that's what Roschke's thing really comes down to. And he talks about how it has a deconstructive effect. Okay. That's really sort of the thrust of the paper is, the deconstruction of the UFO phenomenon, the cultural deconstruction, which I think is very real. But it just goes to show you, getting back to you're asking me about the Trojan horse, right? So this is what I was saying, is that you can make up something almost out of whole cloth, like the Rosicrucians. And 500 years later, it's something that has taken on a life of its own. Okay. And
I mean, the flip side argument to that is that somebody made a text that was supposed to be provocative, that was supposed to subtly be revealing something, and it got too popular. So they say, whoa, 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 it was just a hoax. Just a hoax. Don't you worry about that. I mean, and maybe it's a mix of the two. I mean, who knows? But definitely ideas can take on a life of their own. While we're still in this first hour, I wanted to kind of lay out the timeline again and solidify this thing, because Roswell is a singular event that we're saying is a cover story for something that seems like more of a call and then an answer. So there are other events in the continuum. So June 16th, 1945 is the Trinity test. So this is another thing where Downard said that the giant jumbo bottle might have had a homunculus in it. That's another speculation. So now there's a homunculus on both sides. But we are talking about nukes, and nukes are one of these cross-dimensional things that people like David Lynch really pointed out. No, it's not just a bomb. It's tearing a rip in the fabric of space. But so you have the Trinity test. Then January 10th, 46, Project Diana. July 1st, 46, Operation Crossroads drops Gilda in their ABLE program. So Crossroads, again, this is where you do magic at the Crossroads. And then 25 days later, there's another Crossroads drop of Helen. They called it Baker. Like, why do you even need to name the bombs? It is just weird. But then a year later, you have the Maury Island and Kenneth Arnold events to kind of prime the public for ufology. So these things happened the year before, and these are all the nuclear tests. And then you have the Maury Island incident. And then just a month after that, you have Roswell, but there's something in between. There's the Shelter Island Conference. And you say Rockefeller and Bell Labs was all over this thing. It happened at the Rams Head Lodge. They actually, so not just at the Rams Head Lodge, they opened the lodge early. The Rams Head Inn, they opened it early so this conference could take place there. And then General Roger Ramey is the guy who gives the press conference at Fort Worth. He is in charge of the Air Force unit for Operation Crossroads the previous July, and his family coat of arms includes the black ram's head. So if Operation Crossroads and Roswell are connected, well, it makes sense that General Roger Ramey is in charge of both things, or he's the same guy giving the press conference about Roswell. But this is a continuum of events, and rocketry, that territory is well worn when it comes to the occulty residue on rocketry, but it's not as well worn with the nuclear testing. It's a little bit there, but if we're connecting the two, you're saying that these events, Project Diana was very significant, right? I mean, this was the call, and then Roswell was the answer. Talk to us about Project Diana and Operation Crossroads as a part of this overall thing that happened.
Well, I do see it all as a ritual cycle. And starting with the Trinity tests at White Sands, okay? And you did bring up David Lynch, of course. But I would also include Hiroshima and Nagasaki in this whole cycle. Okay. That all has to do with like the splitting of the atom, very alchemical. It's all about prima materia and so on and so forth. I mean, it has, I don't want to say spiritual connotation, but it definitely has a metaphysical aspect to it, a supernatural aspect to it. It's, you know, it's a science beyond science. Okay. But the thing, you know, so Project Diana is run by the U.S. Army Signal Corps at Fort Monmouth, again, not too far from here and not maybe about an hour from where Bell Labs was. Okay. So these things are all happening at the same time. And I should also add, Bell Labs is due north of where Aleister Crowley's earthly remains were interred. Okay. People don't realize that, you know, his remains, such as they were interred about 20 minutes from here in New Jersey. So for some reason, that's very interesting. I would argue that the origin of Jersey, which is Caesarea, has something to do with it, because January 10th, when you had Project Diana, was the day that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Okay, we know all that terminology from back in 2020, don't we? The crossing of the Rubicon and so on and so forth. And I should also add that the same area is very heavily owned by the Rockefellers. They own tons and tons of land around here. And they actually have like their own little mini World Trade Center up north, you know, at the base of the Skylands. But so I would argue that both Hubbard and Parsons knew about Diana and that they had timed the Babylon working to coincide with Diana. So the whole thing with Diana is that the exercise was about sending radar signals, bouncing them off the moon. So, you know, strictly speaking, it was humanity's first contact, such as it was, with an extraterrestrial body. Okay. So that's the importance of it. And we all know about Dianetics, Diana. Hubbard was very obsessed with this figure, you know, Diana or whomever, Hathor, whatever her other cultural expressions were. And then he moves down to 666. What was it? I actually parked in front of the house. We went on vacation a couple of years ago in Bayhead, and we used to park in front of the old Hubbard house where he wrote Dianetics. So Diana, Dianetics, it's all very important to him. His son, I think in the late 70s, wrote a book that exposed how immersed Hubbard was in the occult and so on, and the whole connection with Crowley. So I believe that the timing of the Babylon working was very much intentional. Okay, that it was all done. And another interesting thing, the Babylon working takes place also on the 34th parallel, which is directly not, you know, I think it's 34 degrees and maybe like 15 minutes. So it's not exactly, but it's roughly parallel with the plains of St. Augustine. Is that a coincidence? Is it? These things just all add up. I mean, you just keep seeing this stuff repeat over and over again. So Project Diana, right, I think, was really the signal, you know, because it's extraterrestrial, right? I mean, bouncing radar signals off the moon. So it's not a physical contact. It is electronic. Okay.
Right. And if there's beings that are electrical-ish in nature out there, they would recognize that attempt from the planet. And as we're wrapping up here, I wanted to read this on the subject of the best people being put on the case and insights from behind the curtain. This is just from the blog. You say, this is what former Enquiry to Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, Wing Commander Sir Peter Horsley, a guy who was as high up in the power pyramid as a military man can get, had to say about this stuff. Suppose we are actually living in a multidimensional time track with the same space, including a young, primeval world, our own, and a much older world with advanced technology, all aging and developing side by side, conscious and sometimes stirred by the presence of the others. Strange ships in the sky, images of ancient creatures, the imprudent antics of poltergeists, and strange noises like the creaking of bed springs from an empty room. These time tracks spin around like separate grooves of a gramophone record, each playing a different score until given a sudden jolt when the needle jumps a track, imposing for a very short period an unintelligible tune upon its neighbor before being returned to its own groove again. Interesting take from someone who was advisor to some pretty high-level people. But Chris, this is always a treat. I am super psyched that you were the first guest for this video format. I'm very uncomfortable here. I don't know what to do with my hands or anything.
It is a bit awkward. It is a bit awkward.
Yeah, I know. Awkward story of my life. But tell the people what you got coming up with the Institute, the links, all that good stuff.
So much coming up. Where should I start? Well, the one thing that I do want to put in a plug for, this is going to be, I'm planning this to be out in September, is XF Ultra, of course. My X-Files book, which is going to go into all the various undertones and subtexts of the series that none of the official books would talk about. I've been working on this book. I have it. It's about 408 pages right now, and I'm not even close to the finish line. So it's going to be a tome. It's going to be a phone book. So just preparing people, what's going on with that. We just did a big thing on the Zizians, the Zizian cult. I've been doing true crime podcasts, but all like true occult crime, sort of in that vein, not just doing about serial killers, whatever. I'm working on a new one right now, which is going to be really mind blowing about this cult whose existence has just been made known to me. Cults, I think, are a huge issue and are going to become an even bigger issue in the future. I think we all need to get used to these cults because we're going to see a lot of crime and a lot of tragedy attached to them. But that void that was left by organized religion needs to be filled by something, and it's being filled by cults. So there's a lot going on. I'm going to be doing a live stream on what I call 80s ick, like all the weird, inappropriate stuff that we saw in our 80s movies that we were completely oblivious to, like E.T. and the Goonies, a lot of Spielberg stuff.
Well, Stephen, speaking of that kind of thing, Stephen King, I never really read much of his work. I'm just now learning that he has so many scenes of inappropriate shit with kids and most of his work. And it's like, well, no wonder he's exalted to the top of our culture because he's writing about pedo shit, kind of.
Well, he wrote
No,
I'm glad you brought that up because that ties in with what I've been working on. He wrote an X-Files episode that had to be rewritten because if you go back and read the script, it's just so creepy with like this little girl and all this coded language. There's something seriously wrong with that guy. That's all I'm going to say.
The 80s ick is coming up.
Yeah.
The Secret Son.
Well, a great example is the movie Fire. Was it Firestarter with the Drew Barrymore movie? There's like, if you ever watch that movie, that's full of pedo sick nonsense. But there was a lot of this stuff in the 80s and 90s that we just completely oblivious to. Oddly enough, I interestingly just watched part of this movie Powder. Have you ever heard about the movie Powder? It was made by a convicted pedophile named Victor Salva. And when you watch the movie, there are certain tropes that pedophiles, for lack of a better term, like to put in their stories, and it's full of them, unsurprisingly. But yeah, there's a lot going on. I've got a lot planned. Live streams, I've got live streams planned for the rest of the year, but things always change because something always comes up and my brain always goes somewhere else. So it's been very active. Both the SSI and the Extension School have been very active. I'm posting regularly, as well as posting on the Secret Son. Unfortunately, with AI, and one thing that AI is really impacting is my traffic on the Secret Son. Because,
really?
Oh, yeah. Because, you just see it. Like, you just do a search on whatever topic, and the AI is going to basically intercept you. It's Google, Bing, all these big search engines now. Your first results are going to be this AI synopsis, let's just say.
Exactly. It really destroys the whole ecosystem of people blogging, and then the ads on their page get seen and they get, a cent for that. But there's a lot of internet journalism going on that uses that economic model, and it's being usurped because the AI just pulls it out and gives it to you on a different page, the search results page, and all those people are pretty fucked. But
if you're reliant on advertising, you are fucked. I mean,
hey, you're speaking my language, buddy. You heard it here first.
It's been like that for a while. Google's AdSense just destroyed everything.
It's true.
I'm glad the FTC is going after them because they have been anti-competitive for so long now. But there's a lot going on and a lot of things in the work. One thing that I will say is that I am very much planning on my next book project after I finish the X-Files book to be something involved with Lucifer's technologies.
Good.
Because there's a lot of information that I've been collating and collecting over the years since I did that series. And I'd also like to kind of put it all together because it's broken up into like 16 or 17 different posts. And I would like people to have it all together. So once I finish the X-Files book, that will be the next thing I'm going to tackle. And I'm going to bring it up to date, because, like I said at the beginning, I believe that we are going to defeat Lucifer's technologies. I really do. I mean it. I'm not just saying that to cheer people up. I really do believe it. And one thing that I really want to do is break people out of this sort of pessimistic, defeatist attitudes when it comes to AI and these other technologies, because they're not invulnerable.
Yes.
And they're not inevitable. All right.
I'm with you on that mission for sure.
I think that these are things that we can basically conquer and make our own. One thing I have noticed with a lot of AI imagery and particularly the animation is how it's just weird, man. I feel like I'm dreaming it, like I'm watching my dreams or something. So I think that we are going to conquer AI and make it our bitch and make it our expression of our collective unconscious. That's something that I've been really thinking very seriously about. And that might be,
cheers to that.
Yeah, that might be the conclusion of my Lucifer's Technologies book, that we're going to win and we're going to make this thing our slave.
I like it.
Yeah, it's not going to be our master. We're going to be the masters. So let me just say that, we didn't have a chance to go into a lot of that kind of thinking, but I really do honestly believe that it's an invader. It's a would-be colonizer, and it's going to be repelled. Okay, so
there you go.
We're going to have Independence Day against AI.
I like it. All right, man. Well, as always, serious pleasure. I think this was a great one. Keep up the good work and take care.
Thank you, sir.
All right, guys, there we have it. The king of synchro mystic swing, the great Chris Knowles. Obviously a strategic choice. I wanted the first one here to be somebody I was comfortable with material I already kind of knew, because there were so many added factors at the studio, but I think it's going to work out. Of course, I started by saying most oldest, one of the clunkiest, stupidest phrases to kick off a new milestone. But welcome to THC 2.0, I guess. I do think my voice in the studio has a little tweaking left to go, but I thought it went really well. Sure, I started off kind of nervous, but I got comfortable pretty quick, and Chris did a lot of the heavy lifting, as the guests do around here. I'm just the guy asking the questions, but I thought it was great. And when it came to the Blue Origin stuff, I do think it's really interesting that the logo is a feather. I mean, fallen angel, why is it a feather? It's one of those things. Now, the guys did splice in some of the imagery that I asked them to, and I don't know exactly where. I'm going to have to communicate better with them on where they put in things and did they put in everything. But one thing I think that we missed was the Amazon Alexa ad. And this is another one of those, is it relevant or are we stretching kind of things, I guess. But Chris points out in his blog that Amazon launched a Super Bowl ad one year for Alexa. And right when the camera pans by, the Alexa device is a very interesting figure on the desk next to it. A little statue that kind of looks like a fallen angel, kind of looks like Baphomet. I think it's doing the as above, so below. Always something, right? It's just, it always stacks up. So I thought that was really good. I'm going to throw that image on the screen right now just so everyone can see it who's watching. But I'm a big fan of this material. The Roswell working perspective is just so interesting. We've come a long way thinking about ufology as more of a spiritual thing. But if that's the context, we got to fold in all the extra ufology material into it. So I think it works. The fact that it's the exact latitude as Baalbek clearly sticks out to Chris as relevant and me as well. So let me know what you guys think of how the first video went. I'm going to be looking at the YouTube comments, the plus comments. We will get through all this together. I've recorded the next couple, and I do think we made some improvements. We have a better frame on the third one that you're going to see, a better framing of the two side-by-side videos. It's all coming together. It's all going to work out. I've already had some people filling up the support tickets for Plus asking, well, how can I upgrade to the $12 tier? Just hold on. You don't really have to do that yet. It'll be there by the 1st of July. But right now, I'm trying to show all the Plus members what it would be like. I don't want you to just sign up for something and you don't really know what it is or if you'll like it. This is kind of like the free trial. It's considered a free trial. And if you're a Plus member who's curious, you do have to log in to the website and you'll see the video right there in this episode, right above the audio player. And there are still some kinks for me to work out. I have to figure out how to do the casting. I know it's a feature of the system I'm working with that you can cast using Apple or Android from your phone to your TV. I saw someone asking if there's multiple language captions. I think there might. Again, something I got to dig into. But I did notice that it does have captions and a caption word search. So almost like Clip Genie's built into it on an individual episode basis. So that's pretty cool. If you heard a word and you wanted to go back to that part of the video, you just put it in the caption search. So we're cooking with gas. I'm very happy with the technology we're using. I don't think there's really any compromises. And if I can just figure out how to get them emailed to people, which will happen before the end of the month, I'm sure, then we'll really be in a good place. But yes, I'm going to keep this wrap up kind of short because I'm doing it in video. And I don't know if I'm always going to do this. I might just put up something on the screen and do it audio because I just have an easier time doing that. I don't like the jump cuts. I like to kind of stop, think for a minute, come back to it. And it just looks weird in video. So I don't know. I'm still working out the wrap up portion, but that's fine. We figure it out as we go. Let's jump to the episode rating for the last episode. Well, first I would say with the announcement, that's the last thing in the feed. Super happy with all the positive feedback people have given me. And I guess a lot of people recognize that I'm trying to do everything I can do without caving to ads. And that's appreciated. So all good. There are people who've said, hey, I probably won't even watch the video, but I'll sign up for $12 just because I want to give you an attaboy. That is like really shocking to me that people would pay a little more than they have to and not even utilize things at that level, but I'm thankful for it. Okay, now as for the last episode with Bear Lando, I know it was good. I think it's definitely above a 4.5. I'm going to say 4.8. I mean, that is kind of our gold standard. We're always super thrilled when we get a 4.8. And it is a 4.8. Okay. I kind of expected that because he is so good. And a lot of the comments were like, I almost skipped this episode because of the cover art. And I think they thought it was more of a health show, a health and diet show in particular. But that's not really what it is. It's more the intelligence of nature and types of communication, of visual communication that might be embedded in nature. And as much as I love that material, it is kind of weird because you have to think, well, nature assumes you know what a brain looks like for walnuts to be good for the brain, or know what a heart looks like for the strawberry to be recognized as heart-like. I don't know, maybe just nature thinks, well, you're going to rip open a body eventually. I'm sure you'll see inside, but it's not exactly the best entry point. Like grapes, a bundle of grapes being good for your lungs. Well, how recognizable is that? You know, you got to rip open some lungs and be like, hey, they look like grapes. I still think the premise is pretty fun, and I tend to kind of plan to teach my kids that that's the building blocks of learning how nature tries to talk to you, or I guess. Or I'm not going to raise crazy hippie tree hugger kids, but I want them to at least appreciate nature and natural remedies as opposed to pharmaceutical ones. So I think that's a good way to help them get some mnemonic device type mental linkage between the vast number of things out in nature and what they might be good for. So fun stuff. Glad it's a 4.8. Bear really kind of blew my mind getting into some of the inner earth ascended master retreat stuff. It seems like he's seen some things that he didn't even want to really talk about. It's probably stuff that is fairly advanced, or you have to see it to believe it. And he's just like, look, I'm comfortable saying that there's something to it, and the rest is up to you, which I respect. So as much as I've listened to Alpha Vedic, I still learn stuff from Bear when we talk, and I think he should be in the rotation more often, and it seems like people agree. Now let's do the meetup calendar thing. We got today 2 of them, Hot Dogs and Hope in Huntington, Indiana, and this is June 1st, Sunday. And then we got Champlin, Minnesota, Elk Creek Brewing, Tacos and Truth. Hot Dogs and Hope, Tacos and Truth. I like it. Both happening today. Sunday, June 8th, Anomalous Amylo Amalgamation. Not making it easy on me. San Antonio, Texas. Halcyon, Southtown. Also, June 8th, Trails Cafe, Truth or Discussion in LA. June 14th, the Very Sexy Raw Milk Party in Lanesboro, Massachusetts. June 28th, Orlando, Florida, Blackjack Parlor, Magic, Magnetism, and Fun. That might be something I could make it to. And then going all the way to July 21st in the far distant future. Who knows what the world will be like, but you could go to Gail Brath's Ale House in Eden Terrace, Auckland, New Zealand. As you know, HigherSideMeetups.com. Get on the calendar, make your own events, or get details about any of them that are near you. And of course, you can sign up for Plus. The second hour today did take it a lot deeper. We went into that Admiral Knowles, no relation, that seems to have maybe been a part of the seeding of ufology mythology with Hannibal Bush. And I think Chris makes a great point. Admiral Herbert Knowles, his hometown is kind of ground zero for a bunch of different events that happen. The Benny and Barney Hill thing, the seance of the 9 isn't far away. And Bell Labs wasn't far away. So there's a lot of things. And if you think about, well, somebody has to make these things happen. It's part of their job. And there's a practicality to just going to work and going north one day, east the next day, west the next day. So very interesting. I think that graphic is quite telling. We talked mainly in the Plus show, if I remember correctly, about the distraction of making ufology a thing. And we talked about and deconstructed who would be involved in that and how it would have worked. And I guess I should say a little bit about the point Chris really wanted to make. We talked a lot about it in preparation and post, and he said it just vaguely there at the end because we ran out of time. But he thinks we're going to win this thing. He thinks we're going to kick Lucifer's technology's ass, and it is not going to be a problem. So there's obviously a lot of opinions, and I think most people would say that we are going to go through a really, really rough period of time, but it's not going to be the end of civilization, and then we will rebuild. So this will blow up in their face, but a lot of pain will come before it does. I share that opinion. I'm pretty nervous about the next couple of years. I'm more nervous about the next 10 years than I am the 10 after that. But these are long arcs. We never really know how slow the timeline moves, even though we can see where the train is going. We don't really know when it's going to get to that spot in the track where we see a big problem. But yeah, I like to hype up that sentiment that we will win this thing and it's going to be okay. We'll see. It's good to be optimistic, right? You don't want to be black-pilled. I appreciate what he's saying there, and we can probably get deeper into it next time as to how we will win. Maybe it's just a waiting game. It seems like a lot of it's outside of our control. Don't engage with the technologies as much as they want you to, and then just kind of make sure you feel safe and secure in your inner circle and wait. I don't know what else to do. There's a scary story that just came out that Trump apparently enlisted Palantir to build a database on all citizens, including all the private information as well as banking information. And it shouldn't be a big surprise because we've known that the plan for so long was going to be this social crediting network system. So you got to have banking stuff in there. But I think a lot of people who had the rose-colored glasses on are like, no, Trump wouldn't do this to me, but he's doing it to you, I think. And it's curious how there's so little talk about it, except only on the alternative scene. That's just something to be aware of, I guess. Maybe there's nothing we can do. Just like the Equifax data breach. Like, I didn't give Equifax my information, but now it's just breached. All right, cool. Thank you. That's the world we live in. But I share Chris's sentiment. I hope we will win. I think we will win. Humanity's been around a lot longer than this technology. But if you see it in this Lucifer's tech context and you think of it as a colonizer or a spiritual weaponized technology injected into our system, then yeah, there will be a time where it goes away, I think. Whew. Well, yes, I'm cutting this one short because I just kind of want to see how wrap-ups go in this environment and how many times I have to cut and all this stuff. But big thanks to Chris. It meant a lot that he was the guest to help me break this in. I appreciate all the support for going this route. Thanks to the guys at the studio for making the magic happen. Thanks to Bear for crushing it with a 4.8. And I will see you next time. The next two shows are already deep in the pipeline and recorded, and I think you will like them. Again, I should just remind you, there's never been a better time to sign up for Plus, because for the next 30 days, all Plus members get the full enchilada of THC Plus TV, and that's a beautiful thing. So hop on in if you're curious, and that's that. I've done my part. Your move, Lucifer's Legions, Trojan Horse Tech Cedars, and ETH Ufology Deceivers. Your fucking move.
Chris says AI is useless. He thinks that it's all hype. But has he tried to make a song from whatever he can type? It may be just a parlor trick, but life is just a parlor. And with every passing moment, we're pushing this shit farther. The secrets aren't so fun, decoding all the things. The secrets aren't second to none, something in the wire sings. The secrets aren't so fun, decoding all the things. The secrets aren't second to none, something in the wire sings. The Secret Sun Institute, a prestigious place to learn. And a cozy, comfy, happy place to watch the world burn. The stupid sorcerarchy will drive us through the ground. And the people will be thankful that they had Chris Knowles around. The Secret Sun, so fun, decoding all the things. The secret sun second to none. Something in the wires sings. The secret sun, so fun, decoding all the things. The secret sun second to none. Something in the